Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVey, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. And today we are talking with Jacob Cooper. Welcome.
Hi, a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
Thank you. I know you've had a long day and it's late, and I really appreciate you taking some time to do this and share because you have such an amazing story that so many would want to hear and need to hear. So thank you.
Yeah, an honor.
So, okay, we're going to get right into it because we don't have a whole lot of time. But if you
Mm.
wouldn't mind, could you just share a little bit about who you are, a little background on yourself?
Yeah, I'm the author of Life After Breath, which is, a transformational book on my own near-death experience that I had, which we'll, get into. And, so it's available on Amazon and, many other sites. And, a public presenter, a psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, Reiki Master. But I'd like to really provide healing from the ground up, from a
Mm,
plethora of vantage points, and just love finding ways to give back the life that I was given in my near-death experience, and to,
mm.
really empower others to see themselves within what I experienced. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, I am so excited to hear your story from the beginning, if you wouldn't mind, just leading up to your near-death experience.
Yeah, September of 1993, was right before the Jewish high holiday of Yom Kippur, which, I grew up, in a Jewish, traditional background. And, that really correlates the time in which the soul is getting ready to meet the creator for a year of abundance, a year of manifestation.
Mm,
And little did I know that I was, about to meet my creator, but in another way, in a way, more of an inner God than an outer God, that
mm,
it was kind of weird. And but I had a highly contagious upper respiratory, virus called whooping cough, otherwise known as pertussis,
mm,
that my parents and myself at the time, did not know about. And so I went to a playground, at the age of 3 years old, and while climbing on top of a ladder, going into a slide, my breathing became more belabored and led to suffocation. Which, for anyone who is suffocated, it's the scariest, most traumatic experience that you could possibly have. Is the breath is really the lifeline for the body, and to lose that just put me in a very weird incubational,
mm,
period where I wasn't crossed over and I wasn't in my
mm.
body. I was just, in this place of eternal suffering. And so when
Oh,
I was
it's
suffocating, it was
horrible.
just as if my body was in a power breaker in a basement, and just one part of my body was going and was out of my control. And I eventually, my body wasn't functioning. And so, kind of like when you're in a car and you try to rev up your car and the engine isn't working, there's no point of being in the car. You just get out of the car and check what's going on. And so that's, kind of what I did. I was disembodied when my body wasn't functioning, and I was able to have a lot more awareness of, my body, and all different parts of it that I don't think I would have had I gone to medical school. Bear in mind, just a 3 year old, child. And then, the last part that I was able to really sense is my own brain, and I was able to really sense the different components, functionality of it. But I saw that my brain was deprived of oxygen slowly, and then literally, I felt a large snap in half in my brain, as if, you take a plug and you just pull it as hard as you could out of a wall, and that wall was what you were tuning into all your life, and now all of a sudden you're yanked. And then, I was just literally felt this large snap in half in my brain. And that's when everything opened up in so many ways, and yeah.
So I'm really shocked here. So you're three. Do you not have the thinking of a 3-year-old during this period?
Mm. When I, really crossed over and I was out of my body, my consciousness was far greater than the 3 year old. But I don't think any 3 year old is a 3 year old. I think there's an ancient being in a new body.
Hmm.
And so the world might see them as three, or they might present to themselves as three, but who they are beyond the surface is an ancient being. And so there's an inner processing on a higher level, and there's outer representation of our identity. And so when I was having this experience, it just I was really more in tune with my inner ancient being and my soul,
Wow.
and that wasn't manufactured or created, by the body or the linear mind. The linear mind in the body was a filter for that eternal being. And so I don't necessarily subscribe to, linearity or linear age. I think we could see that one way, but deep beyond what meets the eye is so much more. And I experienced that certainly when I crossed over. And, moments later, I was, had intense euphoric, experiences that I really get into my book a bit more, but it really has a lot of the classical near-death experiences where I, encountered, angels. I had an awareness of, the all that ever is and ever was, which is in our vernacular, I could only say as God, but that is the most limiting terms that I could have. Awareness of my own spiritual guides, Christ consciousness, my own, soul's purpose, experience my NDE and awareness of previous lifetimes. So it was very much of a full blown,
Wow.
experience that I hold on to, which is, to the minds, to the listeners hearing it, it's mind blowing. But this wasn't something produced by a 3-year-old or produced by my linear mind. This is something, that went far beyond my chronological age or linearity. And so I think the trauma of what I experienced in suffocation combined with that, this was an experience that wasn't produced by my brain, but rather of a higher dimension, was something that I feel is the reason why I have such a clear recollection of it, when most events of my life is pretty normal. But I only remember events that were just above this reality, and I think there's like a greater gear that I tapped into that I could hold on to.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to ask, did you remember all of this? It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. It's one of the more controversial elements of my near-death experience, which is great because if you're controversial, you're allowing people to think differently and you're causing change. And for some people, depending on the level of consciousness, they will understand that, or if they're coming out, of their programming of the worldview, this is diametrically opposite than what they've been taught. And so it takes time for people to acclimate into something a little bit different. And that's okay. Everyone has their own comfort level of understanding. But I'll give an example. On 9/11, for instance, depending on your age, I'll ask someone, what were you doing 9/15 or 9/16? I don't know. But on 9/11, you know what you're doing. You know where you were, what happened. And so I think that really speaks to trauma, where it's something that's so intensely strong. It's either disassociative or so intensely ingrained in memory that you can never forget it. So I think for me, I was on the other side of that, where this was so intensely traumatic that I was able to hold on to that, very clearly, you know.
I'm just curious. So you said you were kind of watching your own physical little 3-year-old body that you were in, and what kinds of things were you recognizing or observed?
I think the biggest thing was my own brain. I just was able to become very much aware neurologically of like different
Wow.
sections and components of the brain that I don't think I would have had I gone to Harvard, neurosurgeon, neuro program. And so I think they really say in our society we use a small percentage of our brain. And I think that's true, but it's hard for the brain to understand the brain. You have to, there's such a higher intelligence that we have, of not of just, metaphysical things, but also, ourselves and our bodies and the vehicles. And so there was this higher intelligence and awareness that was tapping into, and I wasn't limited, by this body. And so I kind of look at it like a pen, and just the point of the pen, where you're putting this intense energy and just putting it to this little ball, and then eventually you get out of it. And so we're all so much more than what we think, and our awareness goes so much deeper than what we're conscious of. So it really, I was just like taking off all these shackles of what I was limited by in the body, and I was, able to just be so much more aware, you know and free in my awareness.
I'm just curious, did you feel appreciative, or for this body you were inhabiting, I guess you might say, or care for it? Were you thinking, oh, I want to get back to that, I don't want that body to die?
Yeah, It was out of my hands, but I still, we talk about the 3 years old. I still had a connection to that life of myself. I still wanted to know what would I look like. I still wanted to know
Hmm.
what would happen if I continue this life. And, I think having the breath taken from me, so one thing that we don't think of is just, it's autoimmune. It's not autoimmune, but you know what I'm saying? It's like automatic to
Right.
us.
Hmm.
We don't think about it. And so, but having that taken away, it put me in a quite of a humbling position
Hmm.
where, it's like, that was taken away. And all of a sudden I was like, on my hands and knees, grasping for air, grasping for life, and I had nothing. So it was something that I really didn't recognize the magnitude of how sacred it was. But also I understood that from losing my breath of the body, that didn't mean that I lost my breath of my own soul, of my own spirit, of my own,
Yeah.
nature. And so, I really recognized that there was a breath of the body, then there's a breath of eternity.
Hmm.
And from losing the breath of my body, I was able to regain, that breath of eternity, and that's what really saved me, and really allowed me to understand there is no death, there is no ending, from completion. There's a whole new beginning of our journey, and it's a rebirth period when we cross over, not a death.
Hmm. Interesting. Now, I have a couple questions. Of course, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, you said you saw your guides and
Mm,
angels and
mm,
experienced God.
mm.
You know, can you describe that a little bit
Yeah.
more?
My when I was able to see my spiritual guides, there was a male and female guide, and they were just massive, and they were so beautiful, and their colors
Oh,
were so much different of this vernacular. And
wow.
um, when I was seeing them, I felt so embarrassed that I forgot that they were with me this whole time, and they were by my side. And it was almost as if I was looking to the closest extension of who I am as a soul, and this was like the closest extension of myself. And it's like these beautiful, you could think of like almost like your celebrity crush in a way, or someone that you think so highly of, and all of a sudden, that person that you put on such a pedestal, you see like so much in them, they're like intimately with you the whole time. And it's like almost
Hmm.
like an intimidation, or it's just like wow, just, it was very powerful in a way. It was just like this incredible, energy that was with you the whole time that you just didn't recognize. And there was like a vulnerability and almost like an embarrassment, but also a level of comfort that they were just so close to you and who you are. But there was just such a power to them. But they, allowed my body to really go down the slide. And I was greeted by people on that day who went with me to the park, and they were calling to my body, or as I refer to it, as the meat suit. And I was able to look at them, but they couldn't see who I was. And my body was flat on the ground,
Hmm.
but my, spirit body, my phyla, my soul had form. And I was able to really feel this sense of form, the sense of like a body that I had,
Okay.
outside my physical. But I wasn't able to like look at it. I could only kind of feel, my presence, my field. And I
Hmm.
was trying to almost like shake them and like call to them when they were calling to me, and I was responsive. And the period of suffocation didn't stop at, when my body suffocated. It lasted like several decades, in a sense that I had this experience that I, kept so closely to me and didn't really tell anyone up, maybe 2 decades later almost. And so really just
Oh,
bogging this down for such a quite period of time was suffocating. But also the suffocating experience happened where, you know, I was calling to these people who saw my body, and I just wanted to shake them to tell them that I wasn't that. And
mm,
that lasted throughout my childhood, where in a sense that, from this NDE, I saw that the world was looking at just, my vehicle or my body, but not really at who I was. And so there's a lot of symmetry that I lived in my life. But moments later, I was able to see an endless array, endless field of angels that were floating, very peacefully right in front of me. And it was just like this thin field of angels that were literally right in front of me. And people think of the other side as a million miles away, but I experienced heaven is really right on earth. It's right here, right in front of us. And it also felt to me, which I, get a little bit more into life after breath, something, so far away as well too. The infinite is not a finite place that you could point to. It's everywhere. It's not like one, you find out, one destination that we could pinpoint. But the angels were a little bit different than the spirit guides in a sense that, the spirit guides were more concerned with me on a micro level, where the angelic realm that I connected to, it almost kind of felt like a minion of God's, or just very identical, kind of presentations, where the spirit guides had a lot of different, presentations. The angels that I saw, were very uniformal, and they were just kind of looking forward, and they were just floating right in front of me. And there's kind of like a brown and gold color right directly, in front of me. And I just almost had to like question, like, what is this real? It's like, still a part of me was adjusting to going to the other side, and just how different it was and over here. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're seeing both scenes at the same time. Your
Right. I was able to go
experience.
back and forth. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. That's unique. But so it's like, do you feel like the dimensions are layered, or?
I feel it's almost like they're all connected, but it's just, you take a dial and just turn it up like a little bit. That's the realm of the other side. It's right directly above this, but it's all around us, if that makes sense. It's there. It's almost kind of like a fan, in our level, it's very dense, so we can see the individual blades. And as you go higher, it's like you can't even see them because their frequency is so high, but they're still here vibrating, but they're just not on the physical basis that you could see them through the physical eyes, if that makes sense. They're just vibrating higher.
So did you communicate with your guides or the angels? Because it sounds like you knew they were your guides. Or was it just a knowing?
Absolutely. There was communication. And I think the greatest, feeling that I had was just being enveloped in this eternal love, this eternal protection, and this feeling of, all was well, will be well, is well kind of thing. And there was just this moment where there was no time. There was nothing that I needed to do. I was just in this eternal moment where, my mind was programmed from a linear basis, and I was in this non-linear dimension, and the guides were just, there with me, kind of calming down my nerves in a way after suffocating, and just allowing me to really adjust to their side. So there was energy, there was love, there was a clear transparency, that I felt that they knew my soul and every part of it. I couldn't fake anything. I couldn't politicize anything. It was all very understood with no need to explain.
And when you say you also saw God, what do you mean by that? Sensed God's presence?
I
Or
would, everyone has a different interpretation of God, and in Life After Breath, I highlight this a little bit more. But, when I was suffocating, there was like a golden palace behind my right side of my head, which corresponds to creativity.
oh,
And when I was looking at this, there was an immense, there was an endless array of angels, but it was also this energy that I connected to, as if, to me, I could explain it as this endless euphoria in the center point of all creation itself. And it was an incredible energy where, we're used to kind of like a cap in our life. We're just kind of like a limit. And to me, the unlimited, forever creative source of energy and creation itself was what I was experiencing, in this energy. It was just like the centerpiece. It's endless, eternal euphoria and non-apex of reality. And if that makes sense, there was no limit to euphoria. There's no limit to where it begins, ends, starts. It was just
it's hard to imagine, but
the center point where everything was created from, and came from, and was connected to, if that makes sense.
did you feel that you were meant to stay out, or did you sense, oh, I am meant to go back?
Yeah. I was giving autonomy of that question. I know a lot of NDAers are told, that their soul's journey in this body isn't complete. There's still more stuff to do. For me, I was given autonomy.
Wow.
And I just asked, if I do stay of this lifetime, what will it be? What will come? And then moments later, I was really given a life review of not only this lifetime, but other prior carnations, which I, chronicle a little bit more in Life After Breath. But the last carnation that I was in was a lifetime in which evidential intuitives and mediums have been able to read for prior to me writing my own book and attest to or getting public was a lifetime in which I took my own life. And I was aware of the different, scenes that happen and how, kind of things transpired, as well as a correlationship with my near-death experience and that last lifetime in which I took my own life and the work that I would be doing within this life. And hopefully we could get into that in a bit, but I also saw, that I would be speaking in front of a lot of different people and, sharing this message. And, and as beautiful as the other side was, this unique window to remind people that they don't have to wait till they die to get to the heaven, that they aren't just here to create heaven on earth, but literally they're parts of heaven here on earth, was something that I couldn't turn down. And so sharing my experience and helping out others and seeing all the different people that I would work with in this lifetime, really allowed me to understand that as beautiful as heaven is, creating it here, in this life is even better, is even, more of a heaven than heaven itself.
Some might argue with you on that, but so how long were you out and what happened? Did they revive you right there? Did they take you to the hospital? What happened with little
Yeah,
Jacob?
I was rushed by an ambulance to the hospital, and I was irresponsive. And, in the hospital, I became, once I said that I will continue this lifetime, I was greeted, by the doctors working on me as well, as my mother who was there. And I was just became aware that, again, this experience that I had and choosing to turn down heaven, on the other side was something that I almost kind of like expected a reward system to. But like you said, I was like greeted by this cold hospital system, this cold hospital bed. And it was like the total opposite of where I was. So there's such an adjustment as well as an intensified trauma, that I had, a couple of days later, like a lot of anger inside of me. And my mother told me that from this anger, like I literally became physically aggressive with the doctor. And I think so much of that had to do with such, of the suppressed and repressed emotional energy that I couldn't properly convey, to my mother or the doctors. And so there was just so much of this bogged down intensity, that came across as anger, and I had a lot of that for many years, but, it took time for everything to acclimate. Near-death experience researchers, will attest that it takes, several decades to fully integrate and process, an NDE. And I could certainly attest to that. It took me for some time on an outer basis, not on an inner basis, but on an outer basis to integrate into this life and this personality, on an outer basis. It took some time, but, eventually it all worked out. And whatever I was being shown, eventually came to be. And, we talk about angels as, things that are other dimensionals, but I think many times angels are just disguised in human form, and so I was once, in a class and a woman randomly came up to me, and I was at the time, a college student, really struggling, to really find myself. And I didn't really think that I would go anywhere in life. And I just, I still remember this NDE that what I had, but I was just like, whatever, that promise of me speaking in front of people is not going to happen. I'm just going to be a regular dude, whatever. And so she said, I see you speaking in front of a lot of people. I see you speaking in front of many, many people. You're going to be a big healer one day. I didn't say one word to this person. She was a total stranger to me. And that really affirmed, and gave validation to the premonitions and, the future orientations of the work that I would do. So it's, intuitives have really helped me out and strengthened and empowered, what I knew on a deeper level. And I'm so thankful for them as being earth angels in my life.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Is there anything else you wanted to share about the actual near-death experience before I have other questions for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's, the NDE that I had, I kept quiet because it was something so sacred to me. It wasn't until I read Betty Eadie's book, Embraced by the Light, that I knew of someone else who had this experience. I didn't know that there was a term for it. To me, it was something so close to my heart that I kept very, very private.
Interesting.
I didn't tell a soul. And once I read Betty's book, it was like, it gave me a lexicon. It gave me a diagnosis like, oh, that was that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applaud the work that you do, because you just never know the impact that someone's story will have, and the empowering work that it'll have, and how it could really allow a person to take ownership of their experience. But also I look at it another way too, where it's like, if I'm known as the afterlife guy, I'll feel like I've done a failing job, in a sense that I want people to see themselves in my story and remind themselves that they're afterlife people too, and they're forever connected to that. And this isn't something that I have a monopolization over. This is something that we all are forever connected to. And it's just funny being in this unique position where we all come from there, go from there, and then almost having to explain that because we forget it. But it's innately inside all of us. And hopefully we, people slowly but surely come to remind themselves. So there's an irony being a near-death experiencer, in a sense that people look at you in this unique way. But I'm like, when we cross over, it's like we all go there. It's nothing
True.
that I own. It's just like a little bit weird to have that in this lifetime, because people forget that. And, the consciousness isn't, opened as much to that, or aware to that. So there's a lot more material within the NDE that, people, they read my book, Life After Breath, and, look at some other interviews too, could definitely look at a closer level.
Yeah, I wasn't, I mean, I was just curious. It seems like every NDE has different elements.
Yeah.
They're unique to the individual, some of these elements. Do you have any theories about that?
Yes and no. I mean, Dr. Raymond Moody, who, is in the front cover of my book, who actually coined the term near-death experience. I probably wouldn't be talking in front of you without Dr. Raymond Moody, who is a friend of mine. But, in his findings, when his best-selling book, Life After Life, and his research, he really finds that a lot of it has nothing to do with the life that you lived. I mean, you've got people living in, atheistic lifetimes, or people living, as Hindus or Muslims or whatever this, and you experience something totally different than what you were taught. I mean, I myself experienced Christ consciousness, and Jesus was certainly Jewish. He's probably more Jewish than I was, being that he was Jewish living in Israel, but he certainly wasn't someone, growing up Orthodox Jewish that I was ever mentioned or taught about in my lifetime. And so I think a lot of it speaks to people's levels of awareness on a soul basis, in a way, on a deeper level. And some of it might be subjective. I can't speak for all, but so much of it is on someone's level of understanding, in the way, as I think the other side really has to do with the person's level of awareness and understanding to different degrees. But a lot of it has nothing to do with the actual life that you were living, other than your life review, in a way, and stuff like that. But it's not a one size fit all. It's interesting, but I think so much of it is so much more than the life that you were living, and all the things that you held on to as reality within that life.
Why do you, I'm really curious, what makes you think it was Christ consciousness, or why do you label it that way?
Because it wasn't like Christ was standing in front of me. It wasn't like, he was there in front of me. It was an energy. And that's the way that I see all of us. We're all consciousness. So we take on different bodies and different personalities. But behind that is an eternal consciousness. Behind that is something much more than the personality, is an energy, is a ray of God, an expression of the divine. And so we take on these names, these labels, these identities, and sometimes that comes through, physically and stuff like that. But behind that, is a much deeper, higher energy. And so that's, kind of what I experienced. And, it was just kind of like this vibrational frequency and this energy that I knew as that. And it was a very comforting sensation, but it's just this ray of eternal awareness, eternal consciousness beyond the personality, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you didn't talk to even your own mom or your dad or your siblings or anyone really about this for
No,
a couple decades? Did you? So
no,
that's just
no,
amazing.
no. Yeah. And that's not easy to do. To have something this profound and keep it so close to myself, it allowed me to be a lot more independent, resilient in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. But there's great value, in proper timing. I think there's never a right time to process anything, whether that's a breakup, a death of love. Everyone has their own readiness. And for myself, it was so sacred that I was glad that I didn't do it, because had I done this, who knows, it could have been, put down. It could have been not understood. I had to really take ownership of it and really integrate it in this lifetime, before I was ready to really,
Mm-hmm.
discuss it with people. But everyone's different. I mean, some people, they have these experiences and they just shout out at the top of their hands. They go on a podcast a week later. It's
Right.
very subjective in how people process these things, and it's unique. Like there's a unique factor to this. There's beyond the universality.
I can't imagine you would have had words though to use at 5
No,
or
I mean, words
10
were
and
just so limiting. And part of the reason why I became public, or why I did this, was obviously to not make money from it. Because any author will tell you, unless you're J.K. Rowling, or, that's not why we do
exactly.
it. It was, my work as a psychotherapist, and my work, and just seeing a lot of transformation that happened from this. It had nothing to do with me. I mean, me, myself, I just want to sit on the couch all day and live a very private life. I'm very shy and private, but it was really about others who needed to hear this. And I just understood how really significant this was on people's lives and their journey. And it's almost kind of like, I myself, in our lifetimes, we have these books. Literally, they collect dust on bookshelves, but someone else might pick up that book, literally, or my book or my story, and it's like a
Mm-hmm.
whole new world to them. But me myself, I'm like,
Yeah,
this is very special, but it's like whatever. It's who I am, and but for other people, it's so transformational. And
absolutely.
so you just never know the impact of just, putting a message out there, and where it will go to and who it will impact. And that to me was the most rewarding experience of this, is actually grounding and integrating this experience, but it took time, and that really to me grounded the experience. Had I done this like so quickly, I just don't know how grounded I would be, or ready I would be
Mm-hmm.
for what would come to me, with the immense amount of questions, or needing to explain myself, or the people coming at me. But I feel a lot more grounded that I took the proper time, to have a readiness for this.
Remind me, how long ago did you read the book and then you started opening up right after that?
Closely around that time, Betty's book was a real big turning point, but there was so many other factors. It wasn't just Betty. Later in my teens and early 20s, I really started to really develop, and get back to this. Early childhood, I was very much open to this stuff on, on a basis. But then going into school, and a society that valued regurgitation over imagination, just
Mm-hmm.
kind of forced me to just put this beach ball down in the water. And eventually, no matter how hard I tried to put this beach ball down, it just had to come up on the surface, whether I wanted to or not. And so I would say, my late teens, early 20s is when, a lot of not crazy, but a lot of stuff began to just unfold. And I could no longer continue living, this life, hiding this experience away. I think to survive, I needed to hide it, but to thrive, I needed to own it, you know?
What kinds of crazy things? I was going to ask you if you developed any kinds of abilities, psychic, clairaudience, clairvoyance, or any of these things that
Yeah,
some people will develop after.
intuition was very strong. In preschool, having this experience, my brain was forever changed, in a sense that my brain had trauma. It snapped in half due to deprivation of oxygen. But I saw that the brain is just the filter between the two worlds. And so from having this experience, I really had like a ray of light going through my brain, and I could connect to on the higher realms on a regular basis. And it's almost kind of like this flow of higher consciousness was flowing through me, which I talk a little bit more in Life After Breath. But, Neil Donald Walsh talks about this conversation with God kind of thing. And I was having that at a very young age. And I don't remember any of the mundane components of my infancy or child. Some I do, but things that I do remember are above this realm. Those are what I hold on to. Those are very transformational. But I had a lot of mediumistic capabilities and, capacity to just have premonitions as a kid, which I wouldn't walk around calling them psychic stuff because that word wasn't in my vernacular. It was more of a nuisance where I would see something and then it would happen. It was just a very annoying, when I would just see something, I'd be like, what's the point of living when I'm just seeing all these things already happening? So, I just view psychic phenomenon and future premonition orientation as just our ability to get out of linear time and to go into nonlinear dimension. And so that's, it just doesn't have this same timeline. And so that happened to me a lot, and a lot of other different things. But, the big transformation that I speak about in Life After Breath was my out of body experience, my, early 20s, late teens, early 20s when I was in community college. And this lasted several weeks where I was literally out of my body, and it was incredibly transformative. And so it turned any belief system that I had or any distrust or anything that I had into just a clear knowing, later in life that whatever I had was very real and we are just so much more than these bodies. But, and I, speak about in Life After Breath about the OBE, a little bit more in depthly, but that was, I think the NDE was transformational, but the OBE was a lot more because in a sense it happened, when I was an adult and it was closer, timeline wise. And it wasn't like, anything crazy as a kid. I could, it was just so real, and it was recent, it was just like a decade ago. So, um,
would you mind sharing a little bit about that? You said 2 weeks.
It was like several weeks that this happened, but I literally just one day woke up and I was outside of my body and I was looking down on my body. And it's just this crazy energetic experience where I could feel, this pulsating, flickering eyeball that would just blink on and off. And it was like wet right in the middle of my forehead. My heart felt like an ocean, like literally I felt like I needed a towel to just dry it off because it was like, it was like this energy. And I was able to feel like this crazy explosion of my own energy system. But literally I was just not able to stop laughing. And when I would laugh, it would just like squeeze out all the tension and all the stuff that I had built up, throughout decades of my lifetime. Just felt like I was just letting go and wringing the towel of all the stuff that I accumulated, and I was coming into pure form. And so, I think, when we have these experiences, it's not like we get to some place. It's like we reduce all the stuff that are barriers to our true light, our true essence. And so it's just like wringing out the towel. And literally, it was September again, and it was the high holiday time again. And I was in a synagogue by myself, just, going through it. And literally I just felt, this blinking eye again, this eyeball right in my third eye, but I felt like these wings right, on my like shoulder blades and in my chest. And I could feel this crazy wings. And then sure enough, my being was able to take flight on these wings. And this was like my animal totem that I was going around, and I was able to look at the whole like synagogue and was able to see the file of energy that connected each person. Up until that moment, I was, the new age statement of we are one is just so overused that I was just tired of, hearing that. But literally I was able to see this, right in front of my eyes, this one energy connecting each and every individual in their own being. And it was just like, wow. So to me, it's just like affirmed to me that there's on an energetic basis, we really get in our own way and we bog down a lot of our true nature, but we are so much more expansive, beautiful, eternal, than we could ever imagine. And I think the biggest illusion is our superpowers inside of us and all around us, and how much more we are than we could ever imagine on so many bases and so many levels.
That's amazing. So you didn't initiate that. That's just something that happened.
No, I didn't take any Timothy Leary drugs or ayahuasca. And It wasn't a
Yeah.
psychotic break. I mean, I think, people ask me, how do we know if something's like psychic or sick in a way, and psychotic or psychotic? And if it's like very threatening, if it's very low energy, that's concerning. But to me, this was something different. This was something very familiar. This is something on an inner basis. This is something to the soul. It wasn't a disruption of my psyche or my mind or something intrusive. It was incredibly euphoric and healing and familiar. It was just tapping into another part of my being, that was always there, but I didn't always, integrate and connect to within my life.
Was that the last time that you, first and last time, that 2-week episode, or do you practice going out of body?
I haven't had something that profound in a while. I have a feeling eventually, within time, it will, but I view, if we're tuned into, it's kind of like we have this comfort zone that we have, of life. And then eventually there's these shakeup periods that we have, whether through a near-death experience or transformative experience, and we're tuned into on a deeper level. We're able to listen to those experiences and allow ourselves to go deeper into it instead of like stopping it in a way or not allowing
Mhm.
ourselves to go there. So it's more of a trust and a rapport, and just an ability to allow ourselves to let go within periods of shakeup, to not, we could have these experiences, but if we have so much fear and trepidation, all that stuff, we could still resist it on a subconscious and conscious basis. So I think it's more of an allowance and ability to just allow our own flow to go in a way. But it's almost kind of like a lobster shell where we're just holding on to the shell of our lifetime. And then, there's an infinite intelligence far greater than our own behind, the blueprint of our lives. And I think so many of these transformational, pockets of our life are really charted. And if we're really connected on a deeper level, we allow ourselves to allow these experiences to just happen. But I think with each individual soul, there's a period of transformation, which really just means changing form. Trans is changes, form is our shape. And so I think for all of us, we have this, but it's a matter of listening. It's a matter of surrendering. It's a matter of allowing, that transformation to occur.
And so now you are using some of your skills. Can you share a little bit more how you got involved in what you're doing now? And
Yeah, I think like I said in the beginning of the podcast, everything that I do is to try to give back what I was given. In moments of eternal suffering and suffocation, I was given back life, and I was shown that there's eternal life, and I was shown that there's a breath of the body, but there's a breath of who we are. And so, the reason why I chose the title Life After Breath, or, why it released at this time, was I noticed that so many people on a literal, emotional, and metaphorical basis were suffocating in their own lives. And so I think so much of our life is to give back what we experienced, what we had. And so, that's my whole goal, is to not say that I'm giving you back, but for allow people to be empowered to take their own life back, and to really allow themselves to really remember who they are and reconnect to who they are, not live a limited version of what they've been taught of who they are, how they see themselves from a very limited standpoint. So I mean, a lot of the work that I try to do is rooted in transformation, and processing it. And each person has their own readiness of change orientation, and ability to do it on their own level. But so, I mean, I do provide, services such as Past Life Regression Therapy. I do give a lot of different, talks, to different groups, and, all kind of rooted in inspiration, which, I view as the language of the soul. But from past life regression, to mindfulness, to psychotherapy, to energy healing, as a Reiki practitioner, it's really, my goal is to really allow people to really retune and reconnect with their own, power, their own force.
Well, how would the listeners get a hold of you? Can you work with people like over Zoom, things like that?
Yeah, I do Zoom sessions. I have clients in Australia, Ireland, throughout the world. And I also have an office here in Long Island. So through my website at jacoblcooper.com, that's jacoblcooper.com, they could connect with me, and they could book, Past life regression, mindfulness, consciousness consulting, in state, I do psychotherapy in person, and over the phone. So over Zoom rather. So I'm accessible,
Yes, and I'm going to put all this up, of course, the links in the video description and, link to your book. And we are running out of time, but I just want to make sure you are able to share anything else on your heart. I know there's so much that we could talk about, but anything else that you're thinking, oh, I wanted to share just one other thing.
Yeah, I just think it's seeing that sometimes we think that life is over at certain points, and it never is. It continues. And the only thing that ends, really in life is suffering, pain, grief, all that, beyond this lifetime does not continue, and, only our eternity, will go on. And I think it's important when we're faced with these challenges to remind ourselves of what we're infinitely connected to versus what we're experiencing in this lifetime. And I think the most important question, that people have to really answer in this lifetime: is this life working against us or with us and for us? And is this universe a trusting place, or is the universe, really a negative place? And that's a important question to have, because when we're able to have a knowing and trust in what we experience, it doesn't change the series of events, but it changes our ability to really engage with those events from a deeper place of faith, of trust, and surrender, within our own way. And, the more that we practice this, the more that we really understand that what's inside of us, is divinely orchestrated and meant in our own way to really prevail and succeed within this lifetime, despite, the temporary speed bumps that we might occur, and, the adversity we might experience. But there's an infinite intelligence far greater than our understanding. I think a lot of this is really entrusting what's inside of us and all around us is infinitely greater than challenges that we present in front of us, in many ways.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you taking time to share with us so much. And thank you to everyone for watching. This has been Julie McVey with Unordinary Made Ordinary. And I hope you'll join us next time for another fascinating interview. And if you enjoyed this, of course, give it a thumbs up. And then if you like this type of content, please subscribe. And I hope you're just having a fantastic day or evening, wherever you are on the planet, or off the planet, as I say.
Yeah.
And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.